Hey guys, it's Kelvin in my review for Waves. And what Waves essentially about is we center on this typical suburban family pretty much, and things seem to be going very well for them. You know, they have great success, but after this very tragic event, this really alters their lives entirely, and we start to see them finally owning up to certain decisions they made, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Waves overall, I was hyped for this film. This seemed like it was going to be one of the most emotional films of the entire year. I loved how secretive things were, but I'm also a big fan of Trey Shults' last film, It Comes at Night. I think that's a very underrated film that took what was seemingly a creature film and made it much more about this claustrophobic contained environment about this family and them just going through this situation. And this film seemed like it was going to be about that once again. It was very interesting seeing how this film would turn out, and honestly, Waves blew me away in so many more ways than I could have imagined. This is easily one of the best films of the entire year that I loved way more than I was expecting to, but we're just getting into right now, starting off with the cast. And holy shit, I mean, you want to talk about just an insane, talented ensemble of actors. Look no further than this film. There's so many phenomenal performances here. Let's first talk about Kelvin Harrison Jr., who, he really impressed me in Loose earlier this year. I thought he did a really great job of giving a very restrained, but very sort of uncomfortable performance in that way. And here, once again, he demonstrates how he is one of the best actors working today, because the character of Tyler is nothing like what he did in Loose. This is a far more showier role, and I can't get into it too much, but Tyler's someone who, he's similar to Loose, has a lot of pressure put on him, but for completely different reasons, and we're really watching as this is eating away inside of him, and he becomes more and more unhinged as this film really does go on, and I think he just did such a phenomenal job here. This is a very hard role to pull off, but Harrison Jr. just fucking goes for it, and I loved what he ended up doing here. And honestly, if it was up to me, he would absolutely be in the conversation for Best Actor right now, because I think he just absolutely killed it in this film. And watching this and Loose, it just really shows how versatile of an actor Harrison Jr. really is. I mean, these are two completely different performances, but he just nails them so well, and I just cannot wait to see what he's going to be doing from here on out, because he impressed the hell out of me in this film. There's so many scenes where he just had me absolutely terrified, but also feeling so bad for him at the same time, and that's so hard for an actor to do, but he just pulled it off perfectly, and I absolutely love what he ended up doing here. Definitely one of my favorite performances of the year for sure. However, easily the big standout of this entire film is Sterling K. Brown as the character of Ronald, and he, once again, just completely blew me away here and giving maybe one of my favorite performances of the entire year, similar to Kelvin Harrison Jr., but Sterling K. Brown, it's far more subtle in that way. I heard a lot of people saying this is the best he's ever been, and I mean, I've always loved him in things like American Crime Story and things like that, but no, this is easily his best performance yet. What he does in this film is truly remarkable, not just because of, the effort that he puts into it and the fact that he has some really emotional scenes. I mean, there's a very emotional scene, especially between him and his daughter at this fishing sort of trip, and he really does break down there, but even subtler stuff, just his eyes, just looking at his eyes, and the way he's able to convey emotion without saying anything is phenomenal to me. It's just absolute masterclass in acting in that way, and I was so impressed with what he did here. There's one scene especially involving him in a courtroom, and it just blew me away. I could not believe how great he did here. I mean, I always knew that he was talented, but I did not know he was capable of giving something this masterful, this complex, this emotional, something that just really resonated with me. I mean, I saw this film last Thursday, and I still have not been able to stop thinking about it, and largely a lot of that is due to Brown's acting here, who I thought just completely stole the show, and I have no idea why he isn't a lock for Best Supporting Actor, because if it was up to me, he would absolutely be in that conversation. I have no idea why people are not talking about him here, because he clearly gave one of the best performances, I think, of the entire year. Someone else I very much have to point out, though, is Taylor Russell, who plays the character of Emily. She, of course, is Tyler's sister, and I can't get into her character too much, but I thought she did a fantastic job. And going from something like Escape Room, which I really didn't think she was that great, into this, really kind of made me feel bad for, like, saying I didn't really think she was that great of an actress, because I thought she did a phenomenal job here. This is a character that's going through a very difficult trauma in her life, and the way she's able to convey that, I just thought was fantastic. I thought she had some really phenomenal scenes in this film, and I was just overall very impressed by her, and it really made me kind of feel bad for, like I said, knocking on her earlier in the year, because she's far more talented than I've given her credit for. The rest of the cast here, I mean, everyone really is in top form here, whether it's Lucas Hedges, who I thought did a really great job here, Renée, Elise Goldsberry, I thought was very solid, Demie was fantastic. Everyone really gives a phenomenal performance. Everyone really is giving it 100%, and just overall, to me, this is easily one of the best ensembles of the entire year for sure. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, which, holy shit, what Trey Edward Shults is willing to do with this movie, I think is just incredible. I could not believe how great he was, because I already knew he was a really good director. I knew he was a good director of, portraying fear and anxiety and things like that, but not in the way that he does here, because without spoiling anything, this is essentially two movies in one. The first half is loud, it's bombastic, it's in your face, it's the most anxiety-ridden thing I think you'll see all year. I was on the edge of my seat, I was sweating from head to toe, I mean, I was just so invested in what was going on. It very much is this character study of watching this character Tyler make all the worst decisions that he possibly can in his life, and I think he did a fantastic job capturing that, and it definitely did have me on the edge of my seat. But then seeing him switch gears entirely with the second half of this movie, which is far more melancholy, it's far more slow, it's far more emotional in that way, I just thought was just phenomenally done, and I could not believe how great his directing truly was here. He really did go all out. I think he really did step out of his comfort zone that way, and it is nothing short of some of the best directing of the entire year. For any director, it's very hard to pull off a tonal shift like this, but he does it in spades, and he really just gave it his all here. I really do feel like this is his big, like, magnum opus. This is the film where Shults really gets to show how great of a director he really is, and if you weren't a fan of something like It Comes at Night or something, I really do think this film could change your tune on him just because of the effort he puts into it. I couldn't believe just what he was able to do with this film, the emotions he was able to elicit out of me, and I just thought he did a fantastic job here. Easily some of the best directing the entire year, but the screenplay is really what I adore about this film, because like I said, you really are watching two very different films here, and yet it still feels like one complete story. It really does feel like one full film. It doesn't feel like this is something where Shults had this really great script, but then he cut it in half. It doesn't really feel that way. In fact, by having the film as two parts, basically, and having this function as two different, two large parts of the whole, the film is even more effective in that way, because you really do get to tell this story from all sides. And again, it's really hard to talk about what this film is about without spoilers, but really without getting into too much, this is a film about emotional repression and a family that has all of these personal demons going on, but really isn't saying anything to each other. It's what happens when you don't have that good support system in your life to help you from making terrible decisions, to help you from going rogue, to help you from falling down a dark path. And that's essentially the dilemma that Tyler's facing throughout this entire movie. Like I said, similar to Luce, he feels a lot of pressure, but not in the way that Luce was, where it's by society. No, it's by his father. His father has this desire where he needs him to be perfect. He needs him to always improve upon. He's involved in wrestling. He has this beautiful girlfriend. He is doing really well. I mean, he just has a really successful life, and yet he's feeling this increasing amount of stress. He's feeling this increasing amount of pressure, and it just builds up throughout the entire movie. And he's the kind of father that, rather than cheering his son on during one of his wrestling games, he instead, stares intently at him with this very stern expression on his face. And so you really do see that, again, he's not a bad father. He's just someone who puts a lot of pressure on his son. He always seems to be trying to, he has this very high expectation of him, and it just, again, seeing where he ends up going in the third act of the film, you really do start to see how this affects him. He starts to become a lot more human in that way, and I thought they built that relationship so well, and it was definitely one of the best parts of the entire movie. And Tyler's the kind of character that you really could hate if not handled well, but they do a really great job of making you feel for this character. You understand he doesn't want to make the choices that he is, but he's getting to a point where he's down spiraling so much he doesn't really know what other choices he could possibly make in that way. And he just makes for, I think, one of the best characters of the entire year. I felt myself so connected to Tyler in that way because we all have these extremely high expectations of ourselves. We all want to excel in that way. We all have this desire to do better. And for Tyler, this is what's eating away at him. This is what is really starting to send him over the edge, especially his very messy relationship with his girlfriend, which again, I don't want to get into because I really didn't know that much going into this movie. The trailers don't really tell you very much at all, and they're kind of going through their own dynamics. So it all just kind of escalates until something unforgivable happens, until something life-altering happens that, again, I can't get into, but that first half is so well done. It does a really great job with building up all of the stress and really just being sensory overload in that way. That's the best way to describe it. This is similar to You Were Never Really Here last year, where it's a very long panic attack, but it's a panic attack that just eats away at you. It doesn't stop. It just keeps going, and it makes you feel very uncomfortable, but yet you're also so riveted. You can't look away at what's going on, and I think the writing was just so well done there. But then transitioning to the second half of the film, that's when I think the writing stands out even more, because you're watching a family essentially deal with the aftermath of what happened in the first half of this film, and this is when you really start to see a lot of them start to reflect on certain choices they made, specifically Sterling K. Brown's character. He goes through a very significant shift in this film. He starts off as a father that is tough on his son, not because he's a bad father, but because of the fact that he, again, always wants him to do better. He's always pushing him so hard, and you start to see how he's blaming himself for this. He really feels like he might have played an active role in all of this. And you have a character like Emily, someone who was very quiet throughout all of this. She didn't feel like she did enough to help her brother. She's very much blaming herself for what happened to him and why he ended up in this situation. Where you have a character like, say, Renée Elise Goldsberry, someone who is their stepmother, and because of that, Tyler isn't as welcoming towards her. He doesn't really have that connection with her, and she's trying what she can to make a connection with him. And again, these all feel like different storylines, but they all really do culminate in the best way possible. Because again, the story is about emotional repression in that way. It's about this family trying to connect, trying to finally move on from all this, trying to finally express their deepest fears, their deepest desires, and it really making them turn into a family again, because the family is very much broken, and they are throughout the entire film. In fact, the film, I think, does an excellent job of making you feel like this is a rock-solid family, that they have this really great connection, only to peel back the layers as the film goes on to really show that, no, this isn't that great of a family. They're very much broken. They don't have those great bonds. They don't have those great relationships that they should have, and that really does just make this narrative stick out that much more in that way. And going back to Tyler's relationship with his girlfriend, one of the things that, again, they do really well is showing just how, even though these two seem to be in a loving relationship, similar to a lot of people in this movie, they're not having any conversation about what's really bothering them. There's a really effective scene for sure where Alexis is just finally trying to have this conversation, but he's so sidetracked on other things. And again, it really just stems back to that idea of emotional repression. These are two people that are clearly in love, but they're not talking things out, and because of that, it's really starting to take a toll on their relationship, and things get very messy and toxic very fast, and it becomes increasingly hard to watch as it goes on, but it's probably one of my favorite aspects of the entire film. And again, especially seeing where Tyler ends up going, it just makes perfect sense in that way, and seeing how he doesn't really talk things out with anyone, again, it really just goes back to that central idea that I think the film does an excellent job with. And their relationship, you know, for a while I was like, why aren't we really focusing on these two a lot? Why aren't we really seeing them talk things out? But again, there's a point where you realize why they're actually doing that. And once you do, the film becomes even better, and it becomes even more hard to watch. And I think it's probably one of the best aspects of the entire film. And like I said, this film definitely does go through a massive tone shift, and that might bother some people because you're watching a movie that is so edge of your seat and so relentless in that way, and then you're watching a film that turns into something far more melancholy and something that is far more calmer in that way, and that's going to throw some people off. But for me personally, I feel like considering just how heavy and how uncomfortable that first half truly was, it only makes sense to make the second half a little bit more subdued in that way. And I do think there are still some very hard moments in the second half. There's a very effective scene, especially showing the relation between Sterling K. Brown and Renée Elise Goldsberry, and it just felt so real in that way. Nothing about it felt like a movie, and I think they did an excellent job with that here for sure, and it just makes you connect to these characters more. So I honestly feel like if we didn't have that second half, I don't think this movie would be as effective as it truly was. And also, I have to say the contrast between Tyler and his girlfriend to Emily and Lucas Hedges' character, I thought was also really well done. These are two very different relationships, and they're played in a very specific way, and I really love the way they got into that here. I just thought that the writing was so masterful in that way. There's so many phenomenal scenes here, so many scenes that are really going to go overlooked at the end of this year. I can very much see this film being overlooked, but it's a film that I just really connected to. Even if you're not a part of a broken family, even if you're not a part of, you're going through similar things that Tyler are, we all have those emotions that we keep bottled up inside of us. We all have those things that we keep repressed, that we don't want to admit are problems that we're going through, and eventually it does send us over the edge. And this film is essentially about, you should talk to people about those things. You should be able to express your deepest thoughts, those fears that trouble you, those things that are eating away at you. You should be able to talk to others about it. You should have that good support system. And this is what happens when you don't do that. It's very much a cautionary tale in the way, but not one that is beating you over the head with that stuff. And I think they did an excellent job of that here. And yes, there is subtle commentary about race and things like that, but that's not really this film's focus. Yes, there is a fantastic scene where Sterling K. Brown is talking to Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s character about how they need to be, they always have to be better than everyone because they're black, but that's not really what this film is about. It's really, again, about that broken family and how they need to come back together, and how this event really does shake them, and how it finally gets them to admit certain things that they've felt they've done wrong, certain choices that they've made, really start to reflect on those things. And it just makes for, I think, one of the most emotional experiences of the entire year. And I can't praise the screenplay enough. I adore every second of it, and it's definitely one of my favorite screenplays of the entire year for sure. The cinematography in this film, though, is an absolute work of art. I mean, there is a lot this film does aesthetically to really get you on the edge of your seat, especially when it comes to its aspect ratio, where, look, I'm going to sound contradictory, because early in the year, there was a film that came out called Lucy in the Sky that did something very similar with its aspect ratio, where it changed throughout the entire movie to make you feel a certain way about a character. The difference is here is that it's far more consistent than Lucy in the Sky, where Lucy in the Sky would just change its aspect ratio on a dime. This film is doing it in a way that's purposeful. This film is doing it in a way to get you to understand the mental state of the character. The aspect ratio throughout this film, it changes with how Tyler changes, with how he starts to feel. When the more unhinged he becomes, the more smaller the aspect ratio gets. And I thought that was a really smart choice overall. And the second it happened, yes, it does throw you off. It is very jarring, but it completely sucks you in, and it just works. It really just works in that way. And I thought they did a phenomenal job with that overall. And I was very impressed by the way that was done. And it makes those moments that are so chaotic, it makes those moments that are so on the edge of your seat that much more thrilling in that way. And especially once that event goes down, they do not hold back. They capture it in the most brutal way possible, and it truly is something you're never going to forget. It's one of those films where I think even if you don't like it, you'll never forget the reaction you had to it, just because it is not something you're going to expect. It is not the direction you expect this film to go in, and I just really applaud them for going there. And I think the cinematography was so well done. It's very much sensory overload and that kind of stuff. And again, then going to that second half, it becomes far more toned down. And when that aspect ratio changed, I just thought was so masterfully done, especially once it finally comes back to its normal aspect ratio. I thought was just at the perfect time, and I totally got what they were doing, and I thought they did such a great job with that. The score here, though, is definitely one of the best of the year, not just from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who, again, continue to show why they're one of the best composers working today, and this is some of their best work yet. I mean, it's so hypnotic and thrilling. It's so just chaotic in that way. It's one of those scores that you can listen to and you're gonna feel a certain way without even watching the movie, and I think they did an excellent job with that. And then it's far more emotional once it gets to its second half. And again, the score is fantastic, but the soundtrack is maybe the best that I've heard all year. I mean, the soundtrack is essentially its own character in this movie. It's the way these characters deal with their certain situations. It's kind of the way they hide themselves from the world in that way. They hide themselves from, talking. They hide themselves from being able to go, from dealing with these troubling issues. And I thought that the soundtrack was so well done here. And yes, there's a lot of needle drops of like Kendrick and Kanye and, all of these contemporary artists, Frank Ocean's, a lot of Frank Ocean actually is in there. So if you love the music, yes, it's in there, but it doesn't feel like they're just doing it because Trey Shults loves this artist. It feels like there is a purpose there, and I think they did an excellent job with it. Every single song choice, it just felt so right. There wasn't a choice here where it's like, I don't know why they picked that. I don't know what the point of that was. It all felt like it had a very specific purpose here. There's a recurring song, especially this great motif that they use, and every time they use it, it was that much more impactful. It worked in a way where I'm like, okay, I get what this song is supposed to represent. And the movie, I remember, was originally pitched as a musical, and it's not a musical anymore, but it kind of could almost still function as one because the music is so consistent in that way. It really doesn't stop, and again, it's not in a way where it feels like it's distracting, like it's ruining the movie. If anything, I think it heightens the film, and I think they did such a great job with the soundtrack here. I thought they really picked the perfect songs. They did a really great job of kind of making it just not tell the story, but elevate the story in that way, and I thought that the soundtrack was so well done here. And the editing, this film is over 2 hours long, but I honestly didn't feel a single second of it. I think it's perfectly paced, especially when it comes to when they decide to transition from that first half to that second half. It's that much more effective in that way. I think they did a really great job with that. And the ending, look, there are a lot of films lately where you have that perfect shot and you want them to end there and then the movie keeps going. There's a lot of films lately that have been doing that for me. Waves is one of the few films that does end on literally the perfect shot, and it's easily one of my favorite end shots of the entire year. I love everything that it represents. I love the way that it's handled, and it was absolutely beautiful. Guys, Waves is one of the best films of the entire year. This film shattered me emotionally and way more than I would have expected it to. It really hit me, it startled me, it shocked me, it got me really emotional. I was crying many key points throughout this film, but I also was, shocked many times. I was scared. I was, just so many emotions this film elicited on me, and that's very hard to do with a film like this. And yes, there have been films that have affected me this year, but this is easily one of the most effective that I have seen all year for sure. And for many, it is going to be a film that is definitely very hard to watch, but it is purposefully trying to make you uncomfortable. It is purposefully trying to get its message across, and I think it does something that is truly masterful in that way. And the care that it put into this family, the care that it put into its message, that just overall elevated Waves into one of my absolute favorite films of the year. It's a film that affected me way more than I really could have, and it's one of those films where even as the credits were rolling, I didn't want to leave the theater. I actually had to take a few moments to collect myself and really just soak in everything that I saw because it's such a heavy film in that way. And it's a film that definitely is going to be hard to go back to, but it's one where I just admire the craft so much. I admire the fearlessness that Trey Shults have. I admire the care he put into these characters, the way he was able to essentially tell two movies but still make it feel like one cohesive story in that way. Just everything about Waves worked for me in all the right ways. Waves is easily one of the best films of the entire year. And if you guys haven't guessed yet, I am absolutely going to give Waves overall an A+. Look, like I said, this film is definitely not going to be for everyone. I know quite a few people that just flat out hated this movie. I mean, not personally, but I've heard many mixed things, and I completely understand that because it is very different. It isn't constructed like your typical Hollywood film. It can be very distracting for many, especially with its tonal shift. But for me, this film just worked in all the right ways, and it's one that you have to try to see as soon as possible. Do not skip this movie. Do not. I know there's a lot of films coming out at this point of the year. I know there's a lot of films that people want to see, but trust me, this should be on everyone's must-see list. This should be a film that everyone is trying to see as soon as possible because it really is going to leave a much larger impact on you than I think you really are expecting. It's a film that I truly think is very special in that way. But either way, guys, to my review of Waves, let me know if you guys saw this movie overall, your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.